Welcome to the EPG Pathshala Linguistics course, in particular to the Morphology and Syntax paper. I am Prabal Dasgupta of the Indian Statistical Institute, Kolkata, and now I'll be covering the module that deals with regularity and IP, regular processes considered in the light of the item and process system, of which we are here teaching the whole word morphology implementation. In this module, my objective is to show that even if you take a completely regular language such as the artificial international language Esperanto, where there are no irregularities, even such a language cannot be used to argue that the IA approach is better than the IP approach. That is the objective of this module. If you don't know anything about the artificial language Esperanto, I need to show you some specimens. For example, in Esperanto, the endings of verbs showing present, past, future tense are very simple. As is the ending of the present, is of the past, os of the future, u of the imperative, us of the conditional, e of the infinitive. That is all there is to say about the verbal system. There are no agreement markers in the verb. The final y written with a J letter, as in the International Phonetic Alphabet, indicates the plural of nouns and adjectives. The final n letter, n, indicates accusative. These indicate inflectional marking. Derivational affixes are like a in the word hundeyo, which means kennel, derived from hundo, which means dog. The final o of hundo and hundeyo indicates that it's a noun. Rapida, the final a indicates that it's an adjective. Rapida is the word for rapid, and rapidezzo, which is rapidity, uses the derivational affix ets, written with EC. The letter C in Esperanto marks the sound TS. So ECO in the spelling comes out as etzo. If you take a word like excuristo, which means a former runner or ex-runner, the ex prefix in excuristo and the ist suffix in excuristo are two derivational affixes surrounding the verbal root kur, which is to run, and o at the end is an inflectional ending telling you that the word is a noun. Now, a language like this, which is artificially designed for ease of learning, which is the easiest language in the world to learn that is actually used by human beings, you would expect such a language to provide an argument for the item and arrangement approach to morphology, in the sense that you would expect us to find that the item and arrangement approach is perfectly adequate for handling everything in Esperanto, even if there happen to be a few historically evolved ethnic languages in which item and process is necessary. In this module, we are going to show you that the opposite is the case. Even the specially streamlined artificial language Esperanto provides very strong arguments in favor of the item and process approach and against the item and arrangement approach, which shows that even for regularity, the item and process approach works much better than the item and arrangement approach. We have given you an exercise in order to give you practice in finding which affixes are inflectional and which affixes are derivational in a language like English. While doing the exercise, you will find that in some places you're going to pause, you're going to be unsure what to do. Like one of the words is taller, another word is unhappiest. And you're going to ask yourself, how do I know whether the in the English word taller or the est in the English word unhappiest is actually an inflectional affix or a derivational affix? What is the criterion? How do I choose? The answer, which we're going to develop for you over the next few modules, is that inflection concerns those aspects of grammar that are decided in the syntax and that cast a shadow on the morphology, whereas derivation is that part of morphology that has no direct syntactic shadow casting involved. In other words, inflectional features play a role both in syntax and in morphology. Derivation is everything else in the affixation. Now, in English, whether the of taller and the est of unhappiest is inflectional or not depends on whether your syntax gives special recognition to the fact that adjectives take three different forms in the positive degree, the comparative degree, and the superlative degree. So if you have a recognition of degree in the syntax of adjectives, then and est are indeed inflectional affixes. If you have so set up your syntax that these things are not treated in the syntax, then it becomes purely derivational. On that matter, you will have to wait until we get to that point in the syntax part of this paper, and that is when you will find out that indeed and est are inflectional affixes, because indeed the syntax does deal with comparative and superlative degree. But this is not the module in which you're going to learn this in detail. We have also, for practice, given you examples from Hindi, Urdu, but they do not pose a problem of this kind. In Esperanto, the facts that become crucial in deciding whether item and process and item and arrangement are equally good are words involving the affix ist, which we introduced in the context of the word ex curisto, former runner, where ex means former, cur means run, and ist means runner, means So when you take curas, runs, you can derive curisto. When you take cantas, sings, and danzas, dances, you can derive cantisto, singer, and dancisto, dancer. Here we set up an activity-based word formation strategy that says if there is a verb of the form ex as, you can make up a noun of the form ex isto. However, not all isto nouns are of this type. There are doctrine or tendency-based versions of ist in words like feminism, pacifism, and sadism, which in Esperanto have the same forms, feminismo, pacifismo, sadismo. The adherents of those doctrines or tendencies are called in Esperanto, as in English basically, feministo, pacifisto, and sadisto. So here your word formation strategy cannot go from exas to existo. It has to go between exismo and existo. Notice that this is compulsory because in Esperanto, the piece that remains when you take out the ismo from feminismo, pacifismo, sadismo, which would be femin, pacif, and sad, has no existence at all. In Esperanto, it is possible to form ism words as in English by attaching ism to an already existing word. But these are not existing words in Esperanto. Sad has no existence, pacif has no existence, and femin has no existence. So the whole thing for the isto depends entirely on the isto words, ismo words. So it's an ismo-isto traffic. The third word formation strategy involved is in the case of example like fructo for fruit, giving rise to the derivative fructisto for fruiterer. Floro for flower gives rise to floristo, florist, which happens to have the same shape in English. Legomo vegetable, English has no special word for legomisto, vegetable seller. Vegetable sellers are not called vegetarians. I'm sure that there are vegetable sellers who are not vegetarians. So as you can see, we've already got 3 word formation strategies for isto words. There is even a 4th one based on specializations. You work with sporto, you're a sportisto, a sportsman, a sportswoman. You work with physico, physics, you're a physicisto, in English, physicist. Notice that in Esperanto, ka doesn't become sa. You're a music or musico lover, or somebody who does it, then you're a musicisto, a musician. So as you see, there are already specialization, object-based, doctrine-based, activity-based. There are 4 different word formation strategies responsible for the isto words. How does the morpheme theory deal with the facts? The morpheme theory has to maximize the coverage, the distribution of every single morpheme as much as possible. The compulsion in the process theory is to take the statement of every word formation strategy as deep and as wide as is warranted by the facts. In this case, you find it necessary to postulate 4 word formation strategies to deal with the istofacts of Esperanto. And if you think about it for a second, you'll find you need exactly 4 word formation strategies to deal with the ist facts of English as well. In contrast, the morpheme theory, both for Esperanto and for English, will try to maximize the unity of one single ist morpheme in Esperanto and one single ist morpheme in English. We have given you an exercise where you try to work out as best you can the morpheme theory's approach to IST, and I believe we're going to find in your exercise that however hard you may try, you have no way to express on the IA approach, on the item and arrangement approach, the fact that certain ist words in Esperanto, and for that matter in English, words like feminist, pacifist, and sadist, depend on corresponding ismo words in Esperanto and corresponding ism words in English. You cannot make sense of pacifist unless you know about pacifism. You cannot make sense of feminist unless you know about feminism. There are no choices about this. Unfortunately, the apparatus of the morpheme theory does not allow you to state that isto words of this type are systematically related to ismo words. That is a fatal difficulty which prevents you from coming up with an adequate account of the material in the case of the item and arrangement approach. You might think that we are too fixated on one bunch of examples, and this may not be sufficient to convince you. We quite understand the morpheme theory has very deep roots in our common sense and in the way we have done grammatical theorizing in traditions of classical India and Greece and Rome and so on. So it is very difficult to dislodge morphemic thinking from our minds. So we do need to give you lots and lots of evidence. We'll take you to another bunch of examples, this time from not an artificial language, but an historically evolved ethnic language, the kind that people often call natural languages, as if Esperanto doesn't function as a full-fledged natural human language. In Bangla, the language we will now look at, we will consider what are known as negative prefixes. They all have the form or. We will first consider a bunch of words that take you from nouns to nouns, where the strategy has the form X noun, bidirectional arrow, or X noun. So you get Brahmon for Brahmin and Brahman for non-Brahmin. You get monojog for attention and monojog for inattention, jotno care or jotno sloppiness. In addition to that, word formation strategy introducing the prefix or, you have an adjective to adjective negative strategy also, which takes you from porichito, familiar, to aporichito, from korshito, tilled, to akorshito, as in land that has been tilled or not tilled, bicholito, upset, to abicholito, tranquil. So you looked at noun, noun, adjective, adjective. Now there's a noun to adjective privative strategy. We use the term privative rather than negative when the meaning is being deprived of something, having something taken away from you. That's called a privative concept. So reason comes out in Bangla as karun. The adjective based on this is okarun, unprompted, without reason. Gunti is a noun meaning counting or count, and the adjective based on this is ogunti, countless. Choitonno, the noun for consciousness, gives rise to ochoitonno, an adjective meaning unconscious. Notice that ochoitonno is not a noun. Now, when you look at these three sets which correspond to three ways in which the element or for negation or privation is introduced into a Bangla word by word formation strategy. Again, you need to compare what the process approach encourages you to do and what the arrangement approach encourages you to do. The morpheme theory, which implements the arrangement approach, says there is an entry in the lexicon called or. It indicates negation. Let us so structure our analysis that this element or has as wide a distribution as possible. Let us not postulate three ors. Let us say there is only one or, and that it sometimes derives adjectives from adjectives, sometimes nouns from nouns, and sometimes adjectives from nouns. If you do this, you will imagine that you're gaining unity. Your difficulty will be that your very peculiar lexical entry or is going to have properties that no word ever has. You see, lexical entries are designed mainly to handle words. Of course, every word has some diversity of meaning and usage. But when you look at how words behave in terms of diversity of meaning and usage, and when you look at this or, you will find that or is radically different from words. It is going all over the place and doing different things and mediating between noun and noun, between adjective, and between noun and adjective. You don't expect a word to do this kind of thing. If you look at the meaning, it is very difficult to unite the meanings not and without. Yes, they have something in common, but you'd be very hard put to define what it is that not and without have in common. In other words, when you look at ogunti, countless, which means without count, and compare that with Abrahman, not a Brahmin, it doesn't work. You see, you expect Abrahman, not a Brahmin, as a pattern to give rise to the idea that when Karun gets an or added to it, or Karun will mean a non-reason, a non-argument, a statement being made which is a bad reason, which is an insufficient reason being given. But in fact, Okarun is a word that can never be used to mean non-reason. Okarun exclusively and always means without reason. It is always used as an adjective. It is never used as a noun, even though the model of Brahman makes you think that there should be perhaps a word Okarun that is a noun. This is not something you can handle in the approach suggested by the item and arrangement perspective, called the morpheme theory. It is something that you can handle if you have different strategies which give rise to three sets of derivatives, and each time takes responsibility for the kind of derivatives that arise from that particular strategy. In these examples that you've taken from Esperanto and Bangla, you will see that the main point coming out of the data is that it is a mistake to think of an affix as being just another kind of word, a little word. That is where we began this course. We began this course by saying it is a mistake to think of words as being big words consisting of little words somehow bunched together. The parts of a word are not themselves words, especially those parts of a word that are called affixes that the process theory says are the material added by affixation processes. Those parts cannot be theorized as if they are little words. The moment you try to do it, your theory falls flat on its face. That is what you've seen in these exercises. Now, these arguments in favor of the item and approach perspective in general, and for that matter, the whole word morphology implementation in particular, though it's only one implementation among several, may not be enough to convince you that the item and process approach is indeed superior, and that the fact that it has won over all the morphologists practicing in the field today is a deserved victory. So let us give you a little bit more thinking of this kind. You see, the item and arrangement idea of language basically assumes that the minimal items of a grammar are morphemes and they combine to form larger structures, and that is all that there is to say in the theory of grammar. In other words, when morphemes combine to form a word and when words combine to form a phrase or a sentence in what are called morphology and syntax under such an approach, the approach says it doesn't matter which kind of combination you're talking about, the laws of combination are going to be the same. The way words combine to form a phrase or a sentence is basically identical to the way morphemes combine to form a word. You are looking at the fact that this part of the theory is a total failure. We now want to take you to the heart of the problem here by contrasting the item and arrangement approach with the item and process approach, which draws a sharp boundary between morphology and syntax. Under the process approach, syntax does combine two or more different things. Morphology does not combine anything with anything. There are no morphemes. Therefore, there is nothing to put together to form a word. A word is formed from other words by these forms of analogy that are set up in the form of word formation strategies. Since the process approach denies that there is anything of the combination kind going on in the formation of a word, there should be consequences of this difference between the approach that uses processes called item and process and the word that uses arrangement called item and arrangement. We will now discuss an important set of data and the theoretical basis for looking at the data in order to convince you that the item and process approach is a superior theoretical toolkit, even when you consider material from the streamlined, artificial, easy-to-learn language Esperanto, which appears to be just a bunch of morphemes strung together. I am referring to one effect, one phenomenon that you find in all languages, which sharply distinguishes morphology from syntax, the strategy shadow effect. Why are we calling it the strategy shadow effect? You know how an earthen lamp is? When you light an earthen lamp, a diya, there is light around the lamp because the diya is burning. Under the diya, under the lamp, there is an area that goes into darkness because the lamp casts a shadow. And that darkness is quite severe. Just as there is very good light coming from the lamp, likewise there is very good darkness under the lamp. So also a strategy, a word formation strategy, sheds a lot of light, it produces a lot of words. But because it produces words, because it produces light, at the same time it produces darkness. Let me show you how. Consider a Bangla word formation strategy that takes you between nouns with X and nouns with X-wala. One example of such an X is Banshi, the Bangla word for flute. A Banshi-wala is somebody who sells flutes. Banshi-wala. Now let us look at the strategy in the kind of detail that we have not tried to do in all these modules. Let us look at it really closely. What do you have? You have X label noun, bidirectional arrow, X-wala label noun. That is what you've got. Now what is a strategy? A strategy is a bidirectional arrow with things on its two sides. Those things are called templates. A template is a canonical shape type that you're matching with an actual shape. You want to match X with Banshi, you want to match X-wala with Banshi-wala. Which one do you match first? Do you match X first or X follower first? Remember, it's a bidirectional arrow. It goes both ways. Which direction, which template are you going to look at first? On this issue, like on many others, linguistics gives us a fundamental principle. The principle is that specific takes priority over general. X is on the left, X follower is on the right. X follower has more information than X, so X follower is more specific than X. Therefore, you try X follower first. In other words, when you're applying X to X follower, you go around looking for words which match the template X follower. You might land upon Bashiwala. And when you do, you say, aha, then the strategy tells me I can go from Bashiwala to Bashi. If you do it backwards, suppose you have a word and you want to see whether this strategy applies to the word. You look at the word. Maybe the word is Mokorondo. You take the word Mokorondo and you try to apply this strategy to it. Your first effort will be to match X wala with Mokorondo. You fail. Mokorondo doesn't have a wala in the phonology and doesn't have the seller or somebody to do with meaning in the meaning. So you say, fine, the right-hand template doesn't match. Let me try the left-hand template. Does it match? The left-hand template is X. Mokorondo is a noun. And X noun matches it. So you apply and you get Mokorondo wala. The point I'm making is not about the word Mokorondo or about Mokorondo wala. The point I'm making is how you are going to use a strategy. What is the order in which you match something with a candidate and make a decision about whether the strategy applies or not? The reason I'm doing this in massive detail is that however hard you try, you will not be able to get the word Bashiwala wala to come out of any application of the X to X wala strategy. Why? In order to get the X to X wala strategy to generate Bashiwala wala from the base Bashiwala, you need to match X with the word Bashiwala. Why will you never get an opportunity to match X with the Bashiwala word? Because the laws of specificity require that when the bidirectional arrow and the two templates called a strategy goes to the real data and tries to find a match, the law says you must first try to match X wala. Why? Because X wala is more specific than X. So you check X wala against Bashiwala, you find a match, and you apply the strategy from right to left. You get an X, so you get Bashi. So from Bashiwala you get Bashi, from Bashi you get Bashiwala. There is never an occasion for you to match X with Bashiwala and get Bashiwala wala. That is the point I was trying to make, and for which I went into so much detail about the sequence of operations whereby a word formation strategy is applied. The point I've just made about affixing wala is a much more general point. It applies to absolutely every affixation. That is what I mean by a strategy shadow. You might say that what I have said is completely pointless and stupid because there is never going to be a reason to say Bashiwala wala. Now here I've got you because you clearly haven't thought about the matter before saying that, if you do say that. Imagine a man with a pushcart who is selling a lot of statues and dolls and things like that. And on his pushcart, there are some dolls that image the Pied Piper of Hamelin. In Bangla translation, that story comes across as Hamelin Bashiwala. Bashiwala is the standard Bangla word for Pied Piper, somebody who plays that kind of pipe or flute. Now, a Bashiwala wala would then be a salesman who goes around selling Bashiwala dolls or Bashiwala statues. It is not at all difficult to imagine such a salesman. The problem is such a salesman cannot be called a Bashiwala wala because Bashiwala wala is not a possible word. You will have to call such a man a Bashiwala bikrita. a Pied Piper seller. This is a point that you can make for absolutely every affix. Consider the affix that attaches to a Bangla noun to make another noun. Antor. You get desh, country, deshantor, another country. Janmo, birth, janmantor, another birth. Potro, letter, potrantor, another letter. Notice that I'm not worried about the final vowel of janmo, birth, potro, letter disappearing when the affix is applied, because OI in the middle of a word is not acceptable. We can quibble over this. If need be, you can create another strategy for the O ending words, but that's not my main point. You get the main point, which is that there is a strategy going between X noun and X antor. And the strategy applies the meaning other. Equivalent to this morphological device in Bangla, there is a syntactic construction. Onno ekta X, other one X literally, which means another. So in order to say another country, syntactically we say onno ekta desh, other one country. In a certain situation that we can construct for the purpose, you will get people saying another other country. The situation is this. There are two young people joking among themselves. They are sleepy. They want to go off to sleepland. And they say, we are going off to sleepland, but they speak softly. Next to them is an old man who is hard of hearing. He says, what was that? You said you're going to another country. Where are you going? Are you going to China? And the younger person says, no, sir, I'm not going to that kind of other country. I'm going to another other country. In Bangla, such a young person would say, Ami onno ekta deshe jacchi, stressing the first occurrence of other differently, thereby using the intonation to show that the double use of the word other in the syntax is for a special purpose. Now, in such a conversation, that younger man, joking at the expense of a deaf older person, using the morphological strategy that turns desh, country, into deshantor, another country, would never dream of saying deshantorantor, would never dream of performing a double application of the ex-antor word formation strategy. Why? Because morphology does not let you do this. You cannot say bashi walla walla. You cannot say deshantorantor. We have given you an exercise in which you're requested to think about what happens to people called in Esperanto Rusistoi and Germanistoi. In English, they're called Russianists and Germanists. They're specialists who study the Russian language and Russian culture, and who study the German language and German culture. Suppose you imagine some specialists who deal with these specialists. Specialists who study German. Can you call them Germanists? We have asked you to do the exercise about Esperanto, knowing full well that you don't speak any Esperanto. But the point is, we have said in the exercise that you can just do it in English and then assume that Esperanto behaves the same way. You'll be happy to learn that it does behave the same way. English doesn't allow you to say Germanistist, Russianistist. Esperanto does not allow you to say Germanististo, Rusististo. Just as Bangla doesn't allow Deshantorantor or Bashi walla walla. This is a major fact. It's a fact extending to all affixes everywhere, even in the regular language Esperanto, where rules have no exceptions. But under the item and arrangement approach, under the morpheme theory, there is absolutely no way to say this. There is no way to make the point that one affix cannot be applied twice to the same word, even though in the syntax, one word other can be applied twice to the same word country, so that you can say an other country. Of course, you need a special situation in which this is done, but you can do it. In the syntax, you can say a specialist about specialists about the German language without any syntactic difficulty. Again, you need a situation where such a person exists. But if such a person exists, you can describe that person syntactically. You cannot describe that person morphologically, not even in the extremely streamlined language Esperanto. This should be enough to show you that the item and arrangement approach simply does not correspond to the way human languages function. You have to use the item and process approach. We called the module Regularity and IA because you are looking at a supremely regular language, Esperanto. Even for such a language where you should be happy to use the item and arrangement approach and say, look, here are morphemes in action, one after the other, no exceptions, no alternations, no allomorphy. Wow, this is the dream of the morpheme theory linguist. It doesn't work. Even for Esperanto, again and again, in domain of facts after domain of facts, you need the process approach. You cannot use the morpheme theory. It doesn't work. If the morpheme theory doesn't even work for Esperanto, how can you expect it to work anywhere else? That is the main point we have made in this module. For more clarity, please look at the e-text and please follow up suggestions for further reading given in this and other e-texts. It is important to keep a balance between your listening and your reading. Thank you for your attention.